Parsha Shelach is a parsha that discusses one of the most dramatic and disappointing moments in Jewish history, where a former group of slaves on their way to the Promised Land, they are being directed there by God in the most divine way possible, and yet, like human nature is, they may take we take for granted certain things, and the Jews wandering in the wilderness on their way to, well, they weren't even wandering at that point; they were just directly on their way to the land of Israel. Also took for granted this divine intervention, direct divine intervention that was so tangible that they were experiencing, and they were nervous to go into the land of Israel, even though God had promised them that it's not going to be an issue. So they decided they wanted to hire scouts to go and check out the land of Israel. And unfortunately, the scouts came back with a ill report of the land, that it would be too much for us to conquer. It does not seem like it is a feasible task. And this is something that just is not in the cards for us. And all of the 12 spies, except for two, Kalev and Yehoshua, gave this kind of a report. And it was very, very disappointing. And we know that because of that, we were punished to wander in the desert for an additional 39 years, to make a total of 40 years that we wandered in the desert. And this whole episode is what takes up the majority of Parsha Shelach. Later in the Parsha, we learn some other halachos, like the mitzvah of challah and the mitzvah of tzitzis, but we'll come back to tzitzis in a little bit. But the question that we are going to address is really stems from the very first Rashi in Parshas Shelach, where as Rashi does in his most eloquent way, he always or very often will like to connect the two parshas, just like we saw last week, where last week Rashi wanted to figure out what's the connection between Parshas Ba'aloscha and the end of Parshas Naso, and that's what we spoke about last week. So in that same fashion, that's exactly what we're going to do this week. What's the connection between this whole episode of the spies, of the scouts, going to check out the land of Israel? What's that doing over here, right next to Parshas Ba'aloscha? So Parshas Ba'aloscha ends with the story of Miriam speaking Lashon Hara about her brother. That's why last week's Parsha ended. Rashi tells us right over here the following: Lama nismecha Parshas Meraglim the Parshas Miriam. Why is it that the story, the episode of the Meraglim, the scouts, going to check out the land of Israel and their ill report following thereafter, what is that doing after the episode of Miriam speaking Lashon Hara about her brother Moshe? Lefi, because Shelachta al iske diva, because Miriam spoke ill of her brother, shedibra ba'acheha, urishayim halalu, and these wicked people, these wicked scouts, ra'u v'lo lahu musar. They saw this mistake that took place of Miriam. They saw that Miriam was then afflicted with tsaras because of the fact that she spoke ill of her brother, and yet they did not take the musar. They did not learn from this episode and apply the lessons of this episode to their own lives, and they came back and spoke ill of the land of Israel. Now, Miriam, the mistake that she made, of course, was a mistake of Lashon Hara, is made very, very clear in a number of midrashim. The Sifrei learns from the episode of Miriam just how serious Lashon Hara is for the average person. Why? For an obvious reason. Miriam spoke Lashon Hara about Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay? Moshe Rabbeinu is not just simply a leader of the Jewish people. It's not just simply a leader in the basic colloquial understanding of the word leader. Moshe Rabbeinu was the greatest Navi, the greatest prophet that ever was and ever will be. And if you don't believe that, the Rambam Maimonides writes that you are an apikoros, you are a heretic if you don't believe that. Moshe Rabbeinu was more than just simply a Jewish leader, more than just a great rabbi. Moshe Rabbeinu was the greatest Navi that ever was and ever will be. And therefore, if Miriam is gonna, if Miriam spoke Lashon Hara about Moshe Rabbeinu, it's more than just simply speaking Lashon Hara. It's more than just speaking ill of another person. You're speaking ill, you're putting down the greatest prophet that ever was and ever will be. That it was a grave mistake that Miriam made. So then you have to ask the question, which is that I understand Miriam made a great mistake. So then if that's the case, then how could the Meraglim been held accountable for not learning from the mistake Miriam made and applied it to what happened with them? Because the two cases are very, very different. Again, Miriam spoke Lashon Hara about the greatest Navi of all time, who happened to also be her brother. And the Meraglim are supposed to learn from there. Okay, I understand from there that I have to be careful with what comes out of my mouth, and I should choose my words wisely when speaking about a prophet. But what did the Meraglim speak about? They spoke about the land of Israel. They spoke simply about the fact that it might be not the best idea from a military standpoint for us to be able to go and conquer. From a societal standpoint, we might not be able to pull it off. From an economic standpoint, it might not happen. It was a very, practical type of a speech against the land of Israel. Was it a negative report? Certainly was a negative report. Was it the right thing to do? Obviously not. But the Meraglim were held accountable because they didn't learn from the mistake that Miriam made. Miriam's mistake was vastly different. She spoke Lashon Hara. She spoke ill of the greatest Navi that ever lived, who happened to be her brother. And the Meraglim are supposed to learn from there. Oh, you know what? We should think twice about the report we're going to give about the land of Israel over here, because we saw what happened with Miriam when she spoke ill of Moshe Rabbeinu. I mean, it seems to be like the two episodes are so different that how could we have held Meraglim responsible simply on the claim that they should have learned from the mistake of Miriam? Maybe we could still hold them accountable for making a mistake because they shouldn't have spoken ill of the land of Israel, especially given the fact that God gave us his approval and his go-ahead to go and conquer the land of Israel. That this is coming straight from God, fine. It may be that it was a lack of emunah, it was a lack of faith, it was a lack of bitachon, it was a lack of trust in God. Fine, I get why it was a major mistake. But I don't understand why it was a major mistake in light of the fact that they didn't learn from what happened with Miriam. So maybe it could be that the premise of our question is completely wrong. It could be that the premise of our question, which is that the Meraglim, it's too far-fetched of a connection that the Meraglim cannot have been held accountable to be able to make that connection. Maybe the premise is completely wrong. Because maybe we have a responsibility. We, Jewish people, have a responsibility to be thinking, analytical, and deep people. That we are not shallow. We have to go below the surface. We have to dig deep. And we are responsible to do just that. In fact, the Gemara tells us that we're responsible to do this. The Gemara puts it on this in the same place as some of the most important questions we get asked when we go to Shamayim after 120 years. The Gemara tells us the following. Take a look at the Gemara in Shabbos. This is a Gemara that we have learned together in the past, but I'd like to focus on another line in this Gemara. Amar Rava. Rava teaches the following. B'shah shemachnisin adam l'din. That when a person goes up for their final judgment, Amrim lo, God or the heavenly court, whatever you want to call it, says to this person. So they are being interrogated by God now for the very first time. face-to-face, quote unquote. They are now, it's after 120 years, they have moved on into the next world. Now they are facing their final judgment. Am I going into heaven or am I going into hell? It's as simple as that. And God says, well, you have to answer me these questions 6. Omrim lo, nasata v'natata be'emuna. Did you do business ethically? By the way, the Shev Shmaitza has a completely different understanding of this first question that most people explain the way I did, which is that did you practice business ethically? The way the Shev Shmaitza was written by Rabbi Aryeh Heller, who was a tremendous gaon, a tremendous genius in the 18th century. He has a number of different works, the work of the Ktsos HaChoshen, the Avnei Miluyim, the Shev Shmaitza. All of them are learned heavily and often inside of major yeshivas. You walk into a yeshiva, you're bound to find a Ktsos HaChoshen or an Avnei Miluyim or a Shev Shmaitza sitting on one of the tables in the Beis Medrash. If you don't see it sitting on one of the tables in the Beis Medrash, either it's a Sephardic yeshiva or it's an Ashkenaz yeshiva that just doesn't have its act together yet. The Ktsos, the Shev Shmaitza, in his introduction to the Shev Shmaitza and Os Hey, has a different understanding of Nasata v'Natata be'emuna. That not did you do business ethically, but did you do your business be'emuna, with faith in God? The second question, Kavata itam l'Torah. Did you set aside time for learning Torah? And each of these questions, I can go on like that. Each question has a lot of depth to it. Asakta b'pri v'rivi yatzit pita Yeshua. Were you engaged in Torah study, in educating the next generation? Were you someone that anticipated this, the final salvation, Mashiach? Topalta b'chachma. Question number 5. Did you delve into wisdom? Meaning that did you look deeper at when you would learn wisdom, when you would learn Torah, when you would learn other ways of the world, did you delve into it? And havanta davar mitoch davar. Did you make related connections? Meaning, did you understand one thing from another thing? Did you go below the surface? Did you dig deep? Were you analytical? Were you thinking? Or did you simply just take information as it was? Did you go deeper? We are told that this is one of the most important things when it comes to being a Jew. God expects from us in the same way he expects us to do our business be'emuna, as the Shev Shmaitza said, with complete faith that God takes care of us, and also ethically, because we are completely reliant on God, and therefore being unethical would be a slap in the face to basically telling God that I don't trust that you are going to take care of me. Emuna, Anochi Hashem Elokecha. This is the number one biggest highlight of all the mitzvos. We right away get asked that when we go to Shemayim. Did you learn Torah? Kavati itan Torah, the lifeline of the Jewish people. Asakta b'pri v'rivia. Were you part of the continuation of educating the next generation? I mean, these are major things. Tzipita Yeshua, salvation. I mean, these are just basic tenets of Judaism. And then Hevanta davar mitoch davar. Did you learn one thing from another thing? The Gemara is telling us that this is a basic tenet of Judaism, that God expects us to be thinking people, to go beyond to go into the depths, to go beyond the surface, to go not just into the shallow water, to go deep into the Yam HaTalmud, to understand the Torah on a deep level, but also to understand life on a deep level. That not everything is just black and white, but there's a lot of gray, and within that gray, there's a lot of color. That we have that we are obligated to go deeper. God's expecting us to be thinking people. That was the mistake of the Meraglim. Our premise was wrong. Our premise was, no, come on, that's too much to expect of people. No. God expects us to be thinking people. That when Miriam speaks Lashon Hara about Moshe Rabbeinu, that is supposed to be a reminder to us, not just that I can't speak ill of the greatest prophet that ever was and ever will be, but that I have to think twice about every single thing that comes out of my mouth. That I have to think twice about what are the words that I'm saying, that my words have an impact. If I speak ill about the land of Israel, that is going to impact the Jewish people's perspective on the land of Israel. That if I speak ill of my neighbor, I might not have even meant to speak ill of my neighbor. But the problem is that I wasn't thinking about what I was saying and the implications of what I was saying. That what happened with Miriam is supposed to teach us how important it is for us not just to think about us speaking, to think twice about the things we say when we speak about great Jewish leaders. No. Havanta davar mitchoch davar. God's expecting us to dig deeper than that. That the mistake of Miriam was more than just the fact that she spoke ill about her brother, but the mistake was that she spoke ill at all about another person. Havanta davar mitchoch davar. And maybe this is why the Parsha of Tzitzis, which is the primary symbol of all the mitzvos, of this idea of Havanta davar mitchoch davar, of that we as a people cannot be shallow. This is exactly what Tzitzis expect of us. That we are commanded by the mitzvah of Tzitzis, uri isamoso, to be looking at them, to glance at the Tzitzis, to learn something when we look at Tzitzis. What are we supposed to learn when we look at Tzitzis? So take a look at the Gemara. The Gemara tells us something amazing. The Gemara tells us in Maseches Chulin that we know that Tzitzis, one of the strings of Tzitzis, need to have tcheles, need to have blue. It's a question of whether or not there is a tcheles today. Some scientists believe that tcheles has been found today, which is why a lot of poskim, including my Rabbi or Hershel Schechter, wears tcheles, because maybe by not wearing tcheles, we're losing out potentially on a mitzvah, and there would be nothing wrong with putting on tcheles anyway, which is why Hershel Schechter wears tcheles, which is why I wear tcheles. However, many other poskim feel as though no, likelihood is that it's not the tcheles, and therefore, there's no need to be able to put on tcheles, and both are very legitimate practices for today. But in a perfect situation, all else equal, of course we're supposed to have tcheles. The Torah tells us that we're supposed to put a seal tcheles. We're supposed to put the blue string, the blue dye onto the string, one of the strings of the tzitzis. So the Gemara tells us, what's with this special color blue? The Tanya, the Gemara tells us, we learn in a brayser, Reb Meir taught, Ma nishtana tcheles mikol hatzfuin. What's the difference between tcheles and all other colors? Meaning the difference between tcheles and other shades of blue even. What's unique about tcheles? Because tcheles dom liyam. Because tcheles is similar to the sea, to the color of the sea. V'yam dom l'rakia. And the sea is similar to the sky. It's similar to the heavens. V'rakia dome le'even hasapir. And the heavens is similar to the sapphire stone, the even sapir, which sits underneath the heavenly throne. The even sapir dome lekisa kavod, and the even sapir is supposed to be similar to the heavenly throne that God sits on, as the Torah tells us, as the pasuk tells us. The pasuk, as the Torah tells us, that the even sapir has a similar color to the heavenly throne. So when we look at tcheles, we're supposed to think of what? When we look at tcheles, we're supposed to ultimately think of God. So what's with all these steps that the Gemara is laying out for us? That when I look at the tzitzis, it makes me think of the sea, which makes me look at the sky, which makes me think of the even sapir, the sapphire stone, that makes me think of God's holy throne, that eventually makes me think of God. Why not just say that when you look at tzitzis, it's supposed to remind you of God? That tcheles is supposed to, or just simply go straight to the even sapir, go straight to the sapphire stone that sits under God's throne. That tcheles is supposed to remind you of the color of God's throne, which is supposed to remind you of God. What's with the step-by-step process over here? Because tzitzis is the model that it's not enough just to be given information. We have to go deeper. We have to delve deeper. That it's not enough just to look at current events and make just a quick prima facie decision of, this is the right thing to do, this is the wrong thing to do. No, that we have to dig deeper. We have to think deeper. What is the Torah's perspective on this? What is the proper way to think about this situation? How maybe there are two sides to every story. Maybe there's different ways of approaching this. Every single thing in our lives need to be thought deeply about. That it's not just about making these rash decisions, but we need to be thinking people. We need to be deep thinkers. This is highlighted as well in the mitzvah of tzitzis in another place. The Torah tells us that when we look at tzitzis, uschartem, it's called mitzvahs Hashem, that we are supposed to remind ourselves when we look at tzitzis, all of the mitzvahs of God. Rashi tells us how, minayin, sheminin gematria, shel tzitzis, sheish meos, because the gematrias, the numerical value of tzitzis is 600. Ushmona chutin, it has 8 strings, v'chamisha ksharim, and it has 5 knots, therefore, hare taryag, therefore it's 613, because 600 plus 8 plus 5 equals to 613. So when I look at tzitzis, it's supposed to remind me of all of the mitzvos. When I look at my tzitzis, I don't do all that math. I don't think in my head, oh, these are tzitzis, which have the gematria of 600, which, oh, tzitzis have 8 strings, oh, tzitzis have 5 knots, boom, 613, I now think of all of the mitzvahs. That the mitzvah of tzitzis is telling us that we have to go deeper. We are obligated to be thinking people. It's the prime example of the necessity to be thinking people. We are about to enter into Shabbos, Yemir Hashem. Shabbos expects us to do just the same thing. That we were given Shabbos, the Torah tells us, that we were given Shabbos because God wants us that once a week that we stop and we think. We stop and think about what's important in life. We stop and think about our relationship with Him. We stop and think about our relationship with each other. It's a day to stop and think and contemplate about what is truly important in life. A day to do Havanta Davar Mitoch Davar. Parsha Shelach shows us just how important this mandate is, to be thinking people, to be deep people, to be analytical people. And the more we think and the more we spend time doing honest thinking, so then maybe, and just maybe, when we do that, we will be able to better ourselves in such a way that will, Mirza Hashem, bring Mashiach Tzidkenu. Every single time that we see tzitzis, we can think about all the mitzvos. Every single time that we are about to open our mouths to speak Lashon Hara, we just think to ourselves, hold on one second. And is what I'm about to speak about important, necessary? Is this going to build someone up or bring someone down? We stop and we think. I wish everyone a beautiful Shabbos and a thoughtful Shabbos. I can hang on for another about 30 seconds until I have to start my next class.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Rabbi.
My pleasure.
Thank you.